There's something decadent about walking into a bakery. The smell of freshly baked bread combined with rows upon rows of cakes, cookies, and other sweet treats can really do a number on your senses. And while the professional presentation, and sometimes over-the-top recipes, you see from trained bakers may be out of the reach of novices, you may be surprised how simple many bakery-style recipes really are. The thing to remember about baking, though, is that precise measurements are critically important to the final product. Bakers work as though they're chemists with how they manage and measure their ingredients to make sure they get everything just so. So when you start putting the following recipes to the test, be sure to focus on the details. If a recipe calls for a teaspoon of baking powder, make sure you're leveling off your teaspoon to get the amount exactly right. And at the end of the day, remember that practice makes perfect. If a recipe doesn't come out exactly how you expected it to, don't completely write it off. It may take a couple attempts before you master a tricky recipe. These chocolate chip cookies will blow you away. To whip up a batch of giant, melty, bakery-style chocolate chip cookies, you need look no further than this recipe from former New York City baker and pastry chef, Jennifer N. The trick comes in high-quality ingredients, dark chocolate chunks, rather than chips, to deliver a rich, melty chocolate result, an oversized, 6-ounce dollops of dough to bake up those giant cookies you typically buy at the bakery to pair with a cup of coffee. In less than 25 minutes you'll have a batch of 8 cookies to dig into for the next few days. Try these tangy and delicious buttermilk biscuits. The difference between the average biscuit and a bakery-level biscuit isn't a perfectly rounded final result. Rather, it's the crusty, flaky, soft taste that melts in your mouth. To make biscuits you could practically sell, you need a good recipe and quality ingredients, and you need to focus on one biscuit making skill: folding the dough. Fold it even more than you think is necessary in order to get those flaky layers. And allow yourself room to experiment. For instance, add in your favorite herbs, like rosemary or thyme, and throw in some grated cheese to create the kind of biscuit that's perfect for making breakfast sandwiches. Make the best peanut butter cookies you've ever tried. The average home-baked peanut butter cookie is meh. It'll do in a pinch, but it's hardly something most people crave. But this recipe for a copycat, the City Bakery peanut butter cookie, is entirely different. For one thing, it calls for twice the amount of peanut butter as flour, then uses light brown and granulated sugar to give it a soft, sweet flavor. The result is a melt-in-your-mouth cookie that will become a quick family favorite. This brioche recipe is as good as any bakery-made bread. Making brioche is not easy. Making bakery-level brioche, which can take as long as 3 days to prepare, even trickier. But this recipe for brioche, put together by chef and food writer Mark Beam, cuts down the prep time to the better part of a day, making it a little more accessible for the novice baker. The main thing to remember is to follow the instructions to AT. Ingredients, such as bread flour instead of all-purpose, and 2 separate rises really do make all the difference. And if you happen to have leftovers the day after chowing down on your fresh-baked loaf, use them to make French toast the next morning. The soft, flaky, thick bread is perfect for this purpose. You'll hear, ooh, challah. When you make this challah bread recipe, you don't have to be Jewish to enjoy the beautiful, delicious, and slightly sweet flavor of the traditional challah bread. The trick, of course, is learning to make the braided beauty from scratch. It takes practice, but once you master a challah recipe, you'll need about 4 hours to make a pair of loaves. You may decide to double the recipe and make 4 loaves a week to enjoy as a pairing for your weekly dinners or as a way to kick off your mornings right. Plus, a loaf of challah is the perfect item to bring to a dinner party or to gift to friends around the holidays. Try your hand at baking a crusty and thick rye recipe. Technically, this recipe for a perfect, bakery-style rye bread only takes an hour. Although you'll need to allow the bread to rise for roughly 12 to 18 hours between its 5-minute prep time and 50-minute bake time. The trick, of course, as with all baked goods, is to get the ingredients right. With a bread flour and a dark rye flour, baked in a Dutch oven, you'll have no problem mastering this crusty, full-flavored loaf.
Guests won't be able to believe you didn't pick these cake pops up from a bakery. Cake pops make the perfect treat for birthday parties and baby showers. And even though they look a little tricky to make, they're actually easier than you might think. You can even use boxed cake mix to cut down on time. That means the next time you have an event to attend, if you show up with a batch of homemade cake pops, people are bound to think you bought them at a bakery. And isn't that what you want? To make people jealous of your baking skills, even if you're brand new to the art? Black Forest cake isn't as hard to bake at home as you think. There's something absolutely decadent about a beautifully constructed, layered Black Forest cake. And for people who eschew the idea of a thick, sweet frosting, This recipe for Black Forest cake uses nothing more than cherries layered between each tier as a filling with a light coating of whipped cream smoothed around the sides. That means as long as you can follow instructions, you don't need to master any fancy piping or decorating skills to make a cake that looks and tastes great. Make the perfect bakery-style blueberry muffins at home. The difference between the average, home-baked blueberry muffin and a decadent bakery-style version may simply be the streusel topping and the size. Bakery muffins tend to be huge. But this recipe for blueberry muffins includes the streusel, and you can always bake them in an oversized muffin pan, so just like that, you can make your own over-the-top muffins without paying out the nose at your nearby bakery. And you won't regret the 35 minutes it takes to whip up a batch. You'll have enough muffins to serve your whole family, or you can enjoy them as an easy breakfast all week. You'll never need to buy a sheet cake from Costco again with this recipe. The Costco bakery sheet cakes have a cult-like following, and for good reason. They're huge, inexpensive, and taste delicious. So what if you could save even more money by whipping up a copycat Costco sheet cake recipe at home? It'll take you about an hour to make the layered white cake, complete with mousse filling and buttercream frosting, although you'll end up making a quarter sheet, better for home-sized ovens, rather than a half sheet. Best of all, the simple recipe gives you the chance to practice your baking and frosting skills with little risk of creating a major mistake that would be hard to correct. This is the perfect vanilla cake for bakery-style desserts. When you've graduated beyond the basic sheet cake, you may want to try your hand at a tall, 3-layered vanilla cake. This made-from-scratch vanilla cake recipe ends up tasting as though it's straight from a bakery, rather than a box, and it's easy to jazz up, even without extensive piping bag skills. For instance, you can add food coloring to the frosting. You can even separate the frosting and use different colors between layers, while leaving the outer coating white, offering a fun, colorful surprise when you cut the cake. Or simply use a coating of coconut shavings, a pile of fresh fruit, or a dusting of cocoa powder to give the cake a fancier, from the bakery, appearance. You'll never believe you can make these cream puffs at home. Cream puffs are the kind of treat you probably don't think about unless you walk into a bakery. The reason, of course, is that they're not the simplest recipe to whip up. Which is why you should plan on test driving this bad boy, and taste testing the goods, of course, before you put it on a party menu. But, once you've mastered the pastry making and cream whipping, this homemade cream puff recipe only takes about an hour to make, and you'll love serving up something a little different, and decadent, for your family and friends. Baking carrot cake from scratch is easier than you think. The thing about slicing into a 3-layer, cream cheese frosting filled, delicious carrot cake is that you can pretend that you're eating something healthy. You are eating at least a little carrot in each serving, right? The thing is, this rich, spice-filled carrot cake recipe is decadent and fully deserving of an occasional indulgence, and a bakery store shelf. Go ahead and allow yourself to enjoy every bite, health food or not. Fancy brownie recipes don't have to be reserved for the bakery. Basic brownies are for the birds. But this fancy, cookies, and cream-stuffed brownie recipe is the type of thing bakery dreams are made of. You see, positioned between 2 soft layers of decadent brownie lies a cookies, and cream filling made with, and this couldn't be easier, Hershey's cookies, and cream candy bars. Quite literally, the candy bars just melt right there in the middle as you're baking the goodies. The result is the type of treat you typically have to buy at the store, but is just as easy as making a standard brownie recipe at home.
The perfect bakery-style Margarita cupcakes for your summer party. Fancy cupcake recipes and flavors are a bakery staple, with some bakeries centering their entire business plan around the cupcake phenomena. And while anyone can whip up a batch of chocolate or vanilla cupcakes at home, why not try for a fancy flavor, like these berry Margarita cupcakes before your next summer pool party? Pair them with a signature margarita drink to match, and all your guests are bound to be impressed with your party-throwing prowess. Try this Nothing Bundt Cake Copycat Bakery Recipe. Nothing Bundt Cakes was a bakery started by 2 women who just loved to bake for their family and friends, but now it's a nationwide franchise specializing in, you guessed it, Bundt cakes. This copycat Nothing Bundt Cakes recipe couldn't be easier to pull off at home, especially since you get to use a box of cake mix to make it happen. The secret to this recipe? Using mayonnaise in place of 1 egg to guarantee a nice, moist consistency. It sounds weird, but you won't regret giving it a try. Ready to flex your baking skills? Try these coconut macaroons. The coconut-flavored macaroon cookies, not to be confused with the pastel-colored macarons, can be a little hard to get right when you're cooking them at home. But with this macaroon recipe, you'll end up with a crispy outer, a soft inner, and the added goodness of a little chocolate to pair with the coconut flavor. Best of all, they're a lot easier to make than macarons, and they're a nice change from the standard cookie when you're looking to try something new. Don't buy a cookie cake, bake your own. If you have someone in your life who isn't a big fan of cakes, but loves cookies, yes, these people do exist. You can give them a special birthday treat by making a bakery-style cookie cake from scratch. By adding extra chocolate chips, colorful sprinkles, and buttercream frosting, you can truly make the cake look and taste like it came straight from the bakery. But it'll end up costing you a whole lot less. Baguettes don't need to be bought at the bakery. Have you ever even considered trying to make a baguette at home? It's understandable if you haven't. The breads look so fancy in the bakery, but they're generally pretty inexpensive, so it's easy to just grab one without thinking about baking a loaf yourself. That said, the process is surprisingly simple, and a good baguette recipe is a fun way for a novice baker to dip their toes in the water with bread making. Granted, it'll take almost 3 hours to make a pair of loaves, but a big chunk of that time is just allowing the dough to rise, so if you're already planning on cooking, it's really not going to be too much of a time suck. Fancy focaccia bread you can make at home. Focaccia bread may look like it would be a complicated recipe to try, especially when jazzed up with olives and feta cheese, like this recipe includes, but food writer Laura Sampson swears that you can get the perfect loaf, even on your first try. The trick is in allowing for 2 separate rises. The first after mixing the dough, and the second after pressing it into a bread pan and squeezing out some of the air. The total bake time is only about 20 minutes, but you'll need about 2 hours total to allow the necessary time for rising. You'll want to learn to make this layered red velvet cake at home. Trying your hand at making a 3-layer red velvet cake with delicious, homemade cream cheese frosting may seem intimidating, but it's actually fairly simple. The trick is making sure you use cake flour, not all-purpose or bread flour. There are differences, you know, when making your batter, and being sure to add a little bit of extra food coloring to really make the cake's red color pop. Otherwise, just follow the directions carefully, and you'll have the perfect cake to serve at your next party. Bake your own bagels for a hearty homemade breakfast. Is there anything better than a freshly baked bagel slathered with cream cheese and served hot in the morning with a cup of coffee? Very few other things come to mind. And the nice thing is, once you master a bagel recipe you can make at home, you don't have to drive to the bakery to pick up your favorite version. Of course, making a batch does take about 3 hours, so you may be better off baking them on Sundays, then storing them on your counter to pop in the toaster oven every morning, rather than waking up before the sun to make a fresh batch every morning.